Hey, so I'm in a different room today in the music building. You've probably never been in here, but this is another studio. And I want to talk really quickly about when to stop taking piano lessons. So I'm not a parent myself, and I'll be the first to admit I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about when it comes to the difficulties of parenting. I would imagine that it's about a million times harder than I think it is. But all my siblings have children, so I got a lot of nephews and nieces, and more than that, I interact with families and children every day. So even though I haven't been through all the tough stuff that comes with being a parent, I have gotten to see all the different parenting styles across the years as I've taught. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, but on the other hand, I think in some ways I've gotten to see more different styles of how parents approach things like piano lessons. So here's the question that normally comes up is just, when do I keep going with lessons? A lot of times as a parent, you'll start to see your child is kind of rebelling or pushing back against practice. They don't want to sit down at the piano. I've had parents even tell me, in some cases, they've seen children like really get sad around lesson time, like I really don't want to go to my lesson. And this doesn't always mean that there's a mean piano teacher. I mean, I can be kind of a mean piano teacher, but even it's not necessarily that they don't like the person they're about to work with, but it's just that they really, really don't want to do piano lessons. So this is a tricky subject for people because on the one hand, you're trying to teach your children, right, that to stick with things, to kind of carry things through. And a lot of times from the adult perspective, of course, you might wish that you had kept taking piano lessons as a kid. So there's a little bit of that adult perspective of, I know you might not enjoy this now, but you're really going to thank me in 10 years, 20 years down the road. And as a teacher, I get a lot of emails from people like, I wish I had kept taking piano lessons, or I wish that my parents had kept me in piano lessons. So it's a difficult subject, right? Now, I think what we have to do is take a nuanced view of what the particular situation is. So there are a few different situations. One situation is my child really enjoys the piano, really enjoys music, but doesn't really want to sit down and practice because of a sort of a self-discipline thing. They don't want to put the time in, they don't want to sit down every day, and they'd rather be playing video games. That's one thing. And one way you can kind of tell if that sort of situation is occurring is look at the general enjoyment around music. Does your child enjoy music in general? And also when you talk about not playing the piano, if that ever comes up in discussion, does the child seem to not really like that idea? Do they say like, oh, I want to keep taking lessons, but it's the practice that I don't like? So in that case, I think you have more of a situation of just having to instill, without overdoing it, of course, this idea of, well, we're just going to stick with things until they work out. Not until they work out, but we're gonna stick with this in the long term, right? Then there's another situation, and I've encountered this before, and this is the other extreme. My child never really wanted to take piano lessons, but I made them take piano lessons. And I think that in this case, if you've kind of forced, quote unquote, your child into piano lessons, or actually really forced your child into piano lessons, and they've just been rebelling, I think you need to step back and think, why the heck am I having my child take piano lessons? I mean, there's a lot that can go on here. And quite honestly, I've seen parents live vicariously or try to live vicariously through their children. I've seen just like a stubbornness of like, well, I could never do this myself, so I want my child to be able to do this or whatever. And in that case, there might be more of an issue of, do I need to pay attention to what my child's needs are, or what my child's interests are? As this is something that some parents don't do. So for instance, I've had parents come to me who will say, Johnny wants to play the cello. He's really always expressed this interest in cello, but I want him to take piano. And I have to say that this just doesn't make any sense to me, because you have Johnny wants to play the cello, so get him some freaking cello lessons. There's no reason, it's not from on high, that we have to study piano. So that's kind of the other extreme. And then in some cases, you know, maybe Johnny doesn't like music. I mean, that's an option, right? Not all of us have to enjoy music. You know, I'm a fan of the physicist Richard Feynman, who's written a lot of great books, right? And he says many times, I just never was really into music. So does that mean he's a life failure? Like, should his parents have said, no, you're going to do music and not math? I mean, or physics. That wouldn't make any sense, right? So I think that in that case, we have to start being a little more in tune with the fact that it's not a self-discipline issue. Our child might have that amount of self-discipline. It's an issue of, are we paying attention to that child's interests? And you know, as a kid, I can tell you that like everyone in my family played basketball and sports, and I hated basketball and sports. And I think it was, you know, something I never wanted to do. I always liked music, right? And so that was what I did. I went into music. And so if you have a kid who's into sports, you know, let them learn that self-discipline with sports. If your kid's into math and physics, let them learn that self-discipline with math and physics. Not everything has to be the piano. And I think we have to step back and ask ourselves some hard questions of, you know, why have we decided our child has to do this particular thing? So those are two extremes. And then, of course, you have something that's, you know, another option is my child doesn't like music and or you know, just doesn't have an interest in doing anything. And in that case, which I've seen many times, then there's maybe a little more obligation of like, well, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. And there are different, you know, you want to give your child many different options. But I think that in both of those two cases, you have to be really careful that you're not trying to push something on your child that isn't really in line with their personality, because you do want them to learn that self-discipline, but you also want them to find themselves. Now, in the other instance where it's just the child loves music and loves piano lessons, but doesn't have that discipline, then there's a whole nother tact, right? So then you have to start thinking about, well, do we have a regular practice time? Are we taking our practice seriously? Do we have the right type of teacher, right? Are we... Is the teacher kind of meshing well with the child? Is it just a matter of like learning that sort of self-discipline? So for me, actually, I was not a very self-disciplined practicer as a child, and I loved the piano and I loved music. It was very, very clear. And I do wish that my parents were a little more strict about practicing the piano. So for example, I remember once, I love to play video games, and my mom said, okay, well, for every, you know, 15 or 10 minutes of video game practice, you have to practice for half an hour at the piano. And she made these little slips, and I just, you know, little like permission slips. And I just went and found out where she hid the permission slips and took them. I mean, there was not like a real rigorous thing. And in that case, of course, without being cruel, I think that your child will thank you down the road if you help them learn some sort of self-discipline, because then you are, you're not kind of going against the grain of their interests, but you're teaching them an important skill, which is to kind of stick with something. So there are different cases, and you know, I've gone on longer than I thought I would about this, but it's a tricky issue, because you don't want to destroy the love for music by being, you know, cruel and associating it with just your child is doing something that they don't want to do. But on the other hand, you do want to instill some sort of like stick-to-itiveness, but at the same time, you want to be really careful about why it is we're doing piano lessons in the first place, and are we just kind of completely working against the grain. So I hope you find that helpful. As a piece of anecdotal evidence, I have to say that in the extreme case of a child has been rebelling from day one and the parents pushed them into piano lessons, maybe other teachers have found otherwise. I've never seen it work out. Never. I've seen it be awful for a couple years, and then finally things just explode into this awful situation. But I think, you have to look at the bigger picture. So maybe if you're looking for just my experience, I've never seen that work out. I have seen kids push through self-discipline obstacles, which is a different thing. All right, I'll see you in the next video.